Hey, it's Drybear. Duet Night Abyss is finally out, has been very heavily anticipated by a lot of people, and now that it's out, let's do a first impressions. Now, with games like DNA, a lot of the value and replayability comes from the end game system. So I can't really do a full review until I've put 100 or more hours into the game, played around with the end game systems, that sort of thing. So this video is going to be more about first impressions, first day of playing, unlocking the gameplay feel, and whether or not it's worth it for you to pick up, or if it's one of those things that you want to wait on. Now, my overall, short version of it is the game is good, but it has a lot of glaring issues. Now, the good thing is most of the glaring issues that the game has are entirely fixable. A lot of these things you can just sit down and spend some time with the right devs and solidify the problems that are there, and we'll talk about that as we go along. But first, let's do a quick game overview for the people that haven't heard of the game, and also for the people that have heard of it but haven't had a chance to play it yet. Let's do a quick recap on what the game actually is. Which is kind of an odd question to answer because realistically, Duet Night Abyss mixes a lot of different genres together. The two main genres that you'll recognize in the gameplay and in the auxiliary systems for the game are going to be primarily looter shooters with a heavy inspiration from Warframe in the core experience, the core gameplay loop, the activities that you're doing and the things that you're unlocking. But there's a lot of inspiration from gacha RPGs. So some of the exploration, the overworld, some of the unlock mechanisms, and also some of the menu systems and the login systems are very much gacha RPG, right? So it's almost as if you took the bones of Warframe and wrapped it in the skin and clothes of a Genshin Impact, Zenless Zone Zero, Wuthering Waves, PGR, that sort of thing. And it's kind of an interesting mix, and the game designer in me is actually pretty impressed with the way they've put it together and all the different, how that impacts the gameplay overall. So as you just saw, we looked at the overworld exploration, doing things like that, but there's also going to be the, looter shooter TFD style, Warframe style crafting, where you'll collect blueprints, get materials, get items, get fragments, and use them to create weapons and characters. You also have your trial level, your account level is based on you unlocking weapons and leveling up characters and things like that, just like it is with a TFD or a Warframe. When it comes to gathering materials, you're going to get the categorical farming methods of a gacha RPG, but then you also have the scaling systems, whereas you work your way up, unlock tiers, and get more and more as you go along. And yes, it does have gacha style banners for this, but all of these are based on cosmetics. All of the gameplay elements you can farm. You can buy them as well if you'd like to, but you can farm them by playing the game and just grinding over and over. And then they have their gacha banner system based on skins and cosmetics specifically. So these are going to be ways that you can modify the way your character looks, get special skins. You can also change your effects and color systems like you can in Warframe, and all of that kind of comes together. Now, when it comes to combat, it differs a little bit from gacha RPGs. Gacha RPGs tend to work on team synergies, or creating teams of a certain size and then using those together. That is still present here, but it's quite different and blends the looter shooter genre into it in, I think, a pretty interesting way. So you still have a party, however, you can't swap with your party at all. You can add two, what they call companions, to your party, and they are always there, and you can spawn them in and they'll fight and do damage for you. They have their own little mechanisms and things like that. And then on top of that, they will give you some passive benefit or bonus. So there is a little bit of theory crafting going into the team composition you make, right? Because you have your character, and then the two other companions you choose will give you special buffs that modify your playstyle in really specific ways, which is kind of cool. But again, you pick your character and you're stuck on that character for the encounter or the instance or the dungeon or whatever it is you're doing. You stay on one character the entire time, which is more like a looter shooter. You can choose from a large list of weapons. There's over 10 weapons to choose from that all have different styles, and you can use all of them on any character. You're not going to want to, because there are bonuses and synergies for certain characters and certain abilities, but that's how that works. Then in the bottom right corner is going to be a lot more Warframe. So they have, their system of sanity, which is the yellow bar, that builds up by you completing things, doing actions in combat, getting scores, but also collecting drops that land on the ground. And then you spend that as a resource to use your two abilities that have bonuses there. So you are kind of powering your character up. But every character has basically a normal ability and then a melee buff or ultimate ability. You can also get an amped version of your second ability that allows you to have a cool cutscene like you would in a gacha RPG, and you combine all that together to kind of create your experience. Then a lot of the farming you're going to do, looking for upgrade materials, fragments, unlocking characters and weapons, is going to feel very Warframe. They even have a lot of like the same kind of modes. We have like a survival mode where you have to try and kill as many enemies as you can within a time limit. There's also an elimination mode where you have to go and find the enemies on the map and destroy them. There's like payload modes where you push a car along and protect it and defend it. And as the main character, you have two different weapons equipped, a melee weapon and a ranged weapon. And I think they actually do a decent job of including these in the combat. So you all fight enemies that have weak points, a la like a Monster Hunter or something. You have to break the weak point, which is usually easiest done with a ranged weapon. And there are some encounters as well where you'll be flying up in the air or the enemy flies up in the air, and so the ranged weapon is incredibly useful. You can also equip your companions in your party with one weapon. You can choose whether they're melee or ranged and create your party that way, which I think is also pretty cool. And I do enjoy the freedom and flexibility that you get from having your own customizable weapons, because each weapon, the melee weapons all have their own move set. They have also some demon wedges that you can add to them to change how they function. Like this spear, I put a demon wedge on it that makes it summon phantom spears, which means when I attack, you see those ghost spears landing down on the ground. That's all coming from a modifier that I put on the weapon. And all the melee weapons have modifiers like that, so you can add like stances and things. The ranged weapons also have some pretty cool functionality, and in general, it gives you some freedom because you choose the character, which has two abilities and a passive that comes with it. You choose your companions, which will help fill out the combat and, you know, come in, like you put two tanks in front of you if you want to play melee. If you want to play like a healer, you can play a healer and put like some, you know, tank characters in front of you, and you kind of loosely construct your party that way. But it also means that you can mix and match certain animation sets for basic combat with different abilities, right? So you can choose whether you're going to use one of the 12 weapons on a character, and that can change how that character engages with the combat. So all in all, good stuff. So that's kind of like the overview of the game. In general, I think the impression is strong. If you have like a really easy to scratch itch for grind like I do, I think you'll enjoy the game, and I think there's enough there for you to want to keep pressing forward and doing more things. But there are some pretty big glaring issues that we need to go over, so let's dive into those in general, because I think those are going to be the kind of feedback you're going to see right now about the game are going to be focused on these major harping points, and people are right to harp on it. The first problem is with movement in general, and honestly, this is why I'm like not super concerned about it, because realistically, if you gave me a couple good gameplay programmers and we sat down for a good solid month, we could solve a lot of these problems and make it feel a lot smoother. I think if you're looking at it from a bird's eye view, everything is kind of loosely in the spot, but there's a lot of major issues with how things function in general. There's a lot of hard stops in the way your character moves, and there's also some dimensionality aspects that are really unfortunate with the way this game functions. The first one is going to be the hard stops. So there are a lot of hard stops, like very jagged things. So one thing you'll notice if I do my basic attack combo here, if I attack and then I'm going to hold, for example, let me hold forward the entire time, and you can watch when my character is free to move versus when my character is not, right? So again, I'm holding forward, pause. There's also some animations with certain weapons. I was holding forward that entire time, which means that when you build in these forced animation stops into basic combos like that, it forces the player to have to use animation cancels, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that it also just, it raises the skill floor for the ceiling in a lot of ways, and also lends itself to the combat feeling really clunky. So if I only did animations, you can see that I'm like moving pretty slow around. But if I use animation cancels, like I do this in ability and then I move and I dash, right? You can also do like the little Warframe flip that they added for some reason. So you can actually do like the Warframe barrel roll as you're going through, and you can use that as an animation cancel as well. And so I think you can actually get some pretty decent movement going on. But because they put in so many hard stops to the way that it functions and moves, you end up creating a lot of weird hitching, and you can actually smooth that out with some like additive systems on the gameplay side to make sure that those kind of blend together really well. Especially when you have weapons that have lots of momentum. So if I switch to my polearm here, if I do this attack, you'll notice this little flip where I zoom around. There's a lot of motion with a weapon like this, but you'll notice every time I do one of those action poses, I'm locked in that animation until I cancel it with an animation cancel. So if I go like this little motion here, I'm holding, and now I can move. those are everywhere. Like there's just so many of those forced locks where it doesn't allow you to move until you do an animation cancel to get you out of it. And I think they could make it a lot more fluid if they heavily reduce those hard locks and then not require the player to do things, right? It's super cool to have those little poses and things like that, but I think that ends up creating a lot of problems with how many times it stops your character. Next, I want to talk about momentum. And this is something that, you know, maybe they were just really concerned about runaway problems, you know, compared to some of the other competitors on the market, but they actually don't play with momentum very much. And I think that when you don't allow momentum and inertia to be part of the movement of your characters, it ends up making them feel really floaty, because a lot of the motion that you have when you're moving around, it doesn't feel natural or like physics is at play. Like there's no law of physics. It's just everything feels like a canned, simple distance. So what I mean by this is every time you do the Warframe barrel roll, it goes the same distance at the same speed, and there isn't really any way to kind of speed it up. Now you can still do the angles and things like that, but it kind of leads to a very floaty mentality. And the same thing goes with the dashing as well. Like fixed distance, fixed size, no follow-up. There's a little bit of drift on slopes and things like that, but everything just feels like you're very hampered and limited with the way it moves and functions, and they could easily make that a lot easier and simpler by just adding at least a little bit of carryover. I think there's definitely, you know, there's concerns about things getting too fast if you allow, you know, like the coupling of different momentums to stack on top of each other, and people can start bunny hopping across levels. But I think a little bit of momentum would be good and make it feel a lot less floaty. This is something that actually, it took me several hours when first playing to get used to. Like when you're navigating the overworld, getting used to the distances that you can dash at and the distances that you can get over obstacles at gets really weird. And imagine if you've played for the first couple hours of Duet Night Abyss, you probably noticed that like just getting up on top of stuff just feels really weird, and like you'll miss and not be able to grab onto anything, and like character doesn't move forward and you get stuck on stuff, and it's just because there isn't any weight to you carrying forward or being affected by gravity or wind resistance or anything, it just makes it feel kind of stiff the way it functions. And lastly, when it comes to movement, I want to talk about the relationship between the 3 dimensions in motion. This is something that if you don't get right, it's not something that people have an easy time articulating. It just feels floaty and lacking impact when things like this happen. So when I mean by the 3 dimensions, so let's put a little character here so we can kind of show this. So a quick refresher for people that forgot their math classes. Let's do like an XY here. So this would be your XY plane, right? So you have there's your Y, there's your X. This gives you 2 dimensions, and then typically when we go into 3 dimensions, we call it Z. I guess it depends on whether you're in aerospace or something like that. So imagine this same XY plane is just this plane here, and then so this is like X and Y, like on a single plane, flat out like a piece of paper. Then we have the Z, right? So like if we put the Z here, this is the Z axis, and this is where your depth comes from, right? So the problem that I have with Duet Night Abyss movement right now is they tend to move on either X and Y and Z separately, which makes it feel kind of awkward when you're moving around. A gameplay programmer can come and fix this pretty easily and straighten it out. But imagine this, right? So if you have a character and you try to dash, right? If you're on a flat surface, like say this is the ground here, and you dashing forward isn't really a big problem. That feels pretty good. However, if you don't have a flat surface, right, you have like a slope and like a little rocky outcrop or something, the problem with DNA right now is that, again, they tend to prioritize either the XY plane or the Z plane, and you'll kind of feel this when you're playing too. So say there's like a real bad guy, we can do, I don't know, let's do like a red or something, right? Say there's like a real evil bad guy like right here down at the bottom. The problem is you end up like if you use an ability or you use like a movement or something like that, oftentimes it will try to stay on the XY plane. And so you'll get this situation with some of the characters, how they play, some of the melee weapons, how they play, where you're like slightly above or slightly below the enemy you're up against because of the elevation, where they, instead of doing this straight line, they need to do more smoothing on the momentum, like let dash attacks and motion attacks go along an incline and lay along that plane so that you can hit the target. So when you're playing, you will run into these weird situations where you're just a little bit above the enemy or a little bit below the enemy. Some weapons are better at this than others based on how much motion they have in their actual kit, but it just feels like they could have done a little bit more in trying to smooth out that movement over slopes. And part of me wonders too if they had originally intended for a game like this to be on a flat plane, right? There's plenty of action games that are pseudo third dimension, and that it's all flat. Like most of what you encounter is flat. A lot of the encounter areas are flat. Even some of the bosses in this game have a completely flat, non three-dimensional ground that you're on. And I think that it would function incredibly well on that, because that's kind of where a lot of the motion is. And it feels like, at least to me, that they added in that multi-level third-dimensional combat later on in the development cycle, and they still haven't gone back and made sure that everything feels really good when elevation changes a lot. So it's one thing that you'll feel when you're playing is you're kind of bumping up on things. You don't smooth over slopes. The lack of momentum and movement makes you feel a little stiff or floaty. There isn't just you don't have as much oomph because you're just drifting around in the air. And again, a lot of this is very fixable. You just A, need someone that knows how to fix it, and B, you need to allocate dev time to make sure that they're actually fixing it. And there are similar problems with the combat, targeting systems when you move. A lot of times you'll run into situations, especially in Melee, where you will end up dashing right past the target. There doesn't seem like there's any intelligent overhead systems that are running to help you correct aim when you're dashing to make sure you land. Even having a target auto-locked and then attacking them in Melee, sometimes you'll go right past them and miss them entirely, have to turn around and attack again. There's even things where the auto-lock and the lock-on system will break if a boss dashes behind you and breaks on camera. But if you're alone with a boss, why would you ever want to unlock forcibly, right? Why would it remove an auto lock when there's a boss in front of you and it's the only boss that's there? The other problem worth mentioning is about performance in general. I have a very powerful machine that is about less than a year old right now, and it's still where you're still getting some, regardless of settings, still getting some frame drops and some hitches. You even will get some actual in-game cutscenes, pre-rendered cutscenes that hitch and lock up and freeze. You'll get black screens and things like that. So I would say it's definitely not the worst performing game that is released this year. And it's hard to tell exactly where their problem lies. It could be a bunch of different things, but there is still getting a steady 60 FPS on a current gen high power machine seems to be a fleeting, a fool's errand, I guess. There's definitely a lot of hitches. You'll get kind of slowdowns in gameplay, and even during cutscenes and stuff too, you'll still run into problems with that as well. Now, performance is it's a sliding window. It's a moving target. It's really hard to hit, and it's one of those things that once you have a game that is feature complete and launched, and it has performance issues, solving those performance issues is a pretty large undertaking that can take a really long time or may never be solved on that front as well, which is kind of a shame, because a lot of the gameplay for looter games and grind-based games like this is the fluidity and impactfulness of the combat, which I think is something that they really need to focus on in the coming months. And all that being said, I actually am curious to try more. I'll be grinding a little bit, and then we'll do probably some guides and some topic cover and things like that, depending on how it goes. But in general, I think the game is really good. And like I said, a lot of the issues that the game has now can be ironed out, and it's up to the developers if they want to put in the time to do that, and if they have the expertise to do so. I think that it's got a really good, solid foundation, and it has all the pieces that you'd expect from a grind game. And obviously, this being the very first day of launch, I can't comment on the end game systems just yet until I've had some time to mess with them and mull them over a good bit. But I think the graphics seem pretty good. I mean, they're definitely not as it's a generation, the generation we're at -1. There are definitely some issues with some of the models and the quality of them compared to some of their competitors, but it's not horrible. It's actually good enough. It's serviceable. And that's kind of where my thoughts are on DNA right now, is it just generally feels good enough. If you like looter shooters, if you like gacha RPGs, there's a little bit of something for everybody in this. And if you can get past some of the, flaws in the movement and combat, some of the flaws with the overall systems in general, there's definitely enough to grind there and some cool cool theory crafting opportunities for people that enjoy that, and some good options there. But let me know what you think about the game. What are your first impressions of Duet Night Abyss and how you feel about the game overall? Drop those in the comments down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.